Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah again. I'm honored, actually we all are honored to have been joined by Professor Dr. Ahmad Fauzi Abdul Hamid, who carries a very rich experience in the discipline of more than 40 years probably. He's an expert and authority in the field. I would not have a very long introduction here. Basically he would be enlightening us about how Sufism became a harbinger of Islam in the Southeast Asia in particular, and obviously then looking at the qualified audience you've got, we'll have an interactive question answer and discussion session. And it's not normally a norm here to be delayed, but because of the namaz time being matching 6 o'clock, we had to delay, for which please accept my sincere apologies.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. Nahmaduhu wa nasta'inuhu wa nastaghfiruh wa na'udhu billahi min shururi anfusina wa min sayyiati a'malina. Man yahdihillahu fala mudilla lahu wa man yudlil fala hadiya lahu. Asyhadu an la ilaha illallah wahdahu la syarika lahu wa asyhadu anna sayyidina Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Subhanaka la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana rabbana innaka antal alimul hakim. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billahil aliyyil azim. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billahil aliyyil azim. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billahil aliyyil azim. Brother Hassan, okay, is the moderator, okay, of our talk or seminar this evening, and my respected audience. Okay, first I'd like to thank the organizers, the İLKE Foundation of Turkey, okay, which is a very new name to me. I'm also very ignorant of the foundation. Thank you for the video, and thank you for the invitation, okay, to me. And I'm actually here for a conference in Mardin, okay, which is, I know it's very far from here. It's very near the Syrian border, and I'll be flying to Mardin tomorrow, okay, for conference for 2 days, and then back here to Istanbul. And as I was chatting with Brother Hassan just now, okay, it's been a long time since I was last in Turkey as an undergraduate in 1990. That's 32 years ago, where I traveled from road actually, from London, from the UK, through Yugoslavia. Then it wasn't dismantled yet. Okay, through Yugoslavia, Greece, Italy, and France, several European countries, and straight to Turkey by road. I spent, I think, 2 weeks here, visiting several places. I reached Urfa, I reached Diyarbakir, I reached Bursa, Ankara, okay. And then my plan then in 1990 was to travel straight to Iraq actually, by road. But then Iraq invaded Kuwait. If you look at my passport, then there's still the Iraqi passport, the Iraqi visa, sorry, under Saddam. So I had to cancel that plan and then flew to Egypt. Okay, and I spent 2 weeks in Egypt, 2 weeks in Turkey, and 2 weeks in Egypt, and back to the UK by flight. Okay, so that was an adventure which was easier to do when you were unmarried. Okay, when you are married, you have other burdens, okay, that you have to think and care about. Okay, of course. Okay, but I think Turkey has some very good memories, not only for me as an individual, but for us Muslims. Okay, as part of the Ottoman Empire, of course. Okay, in fact, very historic relations with the Malay world. Okay, and not just with Malaysia, but with Indonesia and other nation states of the Southeast Asia. And if you refer to some history books, for instance, one very authoritative book I really recommend for those who want to know more about Malaysia is by Andaya and Andaya, two historians, American historians, history of Malaysia. Okay, and one point I got from there is that during anti-colonial Malay fights against British colonialism, okay, back in the early 20th century and late 19th century, the flag, amongst the flag hoisted by the Malay anti-colonial fighters were the Ottoman flag. It was the Ottoman flag actually. Okay, and even until about 100 years ago, okay, before the dismantling of the empire, the prayer read during the Friday sermon, okay, in a lot of Malayan mosques were actually for the blessing of the Turkish Sultan, of the Ottoman Sultan. So there was this recognition, despite, of course, for those who learn history will know that even by the early 20th century, even by the late 19th century, Turkey was, well, the Ottoman Empire was already ailing. Okay, it had deteriorated to a lot of extent in many aspects. Okay, but for Malay Muslims in Southeast Asia, there was always this emotional attachment, okay, to Turkey, and it was historic linkages. Okay, and for those who know Malaysian history, the longest-serving ruling party, UMNO, United Malays National Organization, once headed by Mahathir Mohamad, it was founded by On Jaafar. On Jaafar is I think the grandfather, okay, or the father of On Jaafar was actually married a Turkish lady. So On Jaafar was the founder of UMNO. Then his son became the third Prime Minister of Malaysia, Hussein On. And now the son of Hussein On, Hishamuddin Hussein, is the Defense Minister. So these are offspring of Turkish Malay marriages, okay, if you like it. Okay, and also some scholars, Hussein Alatas, Najib Alatas, they have their own, but apart from Arabic roots, they also have Turkish roots. Okay, Tengku Aziz is another well-known Malay Muslim intellectual. Also, they have Turkish roots, okay, in their lineage. Okay, so that's one very important point. And another thing I'd like to mention is for those of you who follow Malaysian contemporary history or politics. I'm a political scientist by training. Okay, Malaysia has just dissolved its parliament less than a month ago, and that's a great relief for me, because I've been getting incessant calls and WhatsApp messages asking for interviews and so on. So it's good to be able to clear my mind of this. Okay, if you Google, I've got a lot of statements or political commentaries I make as a political scientist in the Malaysian and also in the international news. So now I can decline all of them. Okay, using the pretext that I'm here in Istanbul, okay, in Turkey. Okay, so on our topic, okay, that I've basically been asked, is based on a chapter, a book chapter, okay, which I authored about 2-3 years ago upon the request of İLKE Foundation's chairman, okay, Prof. Lutfi Sunar, who I understand will be here with us shortly. Okay, and he edited the book and requested me to write something on Sufism, which is of course part of my expertise, but not the whole expertise. Okay, I write about, I write about many things. Okay, not just on Sufism. Okay, I've written on extremism, research on extremism. My latest research is on the Malaysian response to the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan in August 2021. This is my very latest research. Okay, and I've written on contemporary politics, history as well, and even on the Middle East. Okay, I've written on Kashmir. On the Middle East, I've also written on the Christians in the Middle East. Okay, and how they get along, okay, or interact with the Muslims, and all of these you can Google. Okay, published as either as chapters or articles in scholarly journals by well-regarded publishers, inshallah, whether from the Muslim world, okay, or from international publishers, Routledge, OUP, also INSEE Press, and so on. Okay, so this is basically the abstract which I've prepared, and I think for those of us, especially students here, okay, who are well read into this topic, okay, of Sufism, okay, will know that the term preferred, okay, by those who are well versed in Arabic is tasawwuf, okay, of course, but when it's transliterated into English, okay, so the term commonly used is Sufism. It might not be preferable, or we might not agree to it, because normally when you attach the ism word, it reflects something which is more rational rather than spiritual. It has to do with the mind. Okay, that's normally the connotation you get, okay, when you have some ism, okay, attached to a particular line of thought. But basically Sufism is something that, okay, it's experiential. It's not something that it is to be studied and understood merely as theory. Okay, so of course you can read about it. Many books written on Sufism, and of course we are here in Turkey, the land of Jalaluddin Rumi. Okay, later when I returned back to Istanbul from Mardin, I'm planning a visit to Konya. Okay, of course. Okay, so it has to do basically with the knowledge of the heart, qalb. And there's a very famous hadith from the Holy Prophet ﷺ that there is one organ of us okay, inside men, okay, and women here, who controls other parts of the body, okay, and that is the heart. Okay, so what this may be at variance, okay, with some of us who are, well, very Western trained or educated. Many of us are. Even I got all my tertiary degrees from British universities. Okay, we might think that the most important organ in our self is the brain. Okay, but it's actually very different. Okay, if we look, okay, into the spiritual essence, okay, of Islam, it speaks about the heart, okay, the heart of qalb. Okay, and how is it externalized? Okay, there are several terms used, and the most, I think, popular one is akhlaq. Okay, if there is no akhlaq, okay, that means there's, one has not practiced, well, Sufism or even Islam. Okay, because Sufis will say that akhlaq is the essence of Islam. There are so many people who are very ambitious, okay, to struggle for Islam, but their akhlaq remains a lot to be desired. Okay, at the extreme, you go to the extremities, okay, and you might be involved in extremists, or, well, however you call it, Islamists or fundamentalists, or what types of revivalist movements and so on. Okay. And a lot of Islamists themselves, and you look into the literature, have been very critical of the so-called Islamists. Not Islam per se, but okay, those who adhere to Islamism. And as a political scientist, I differentiate it, okay, between Islam as faith, religion, and Islamism, which is mainly political doctrine. Okay, and similarly, if you look into the developments of other religions, okay, how would you conceive a Jew, for instance, but who's very friendly to Muslims, but that will be different from a Zionist. Okay, because Zionism is a political articulation, okay, of well, political Judaism, if you will say. We have problems in India, for instance, okay, with the Hindutva version of Hinduism, which is very different actually from Hinduism. You look into the history, I've written a bit on Kashmir, okay, and it's actually sourced from the Nazis or even from the Mussolinis in the 1930s, rather than from the essence of Hinduism. You look into the centuries of Hindu-Muslim interaction in India. Of course, there were some problems, but there were also some very good layers of interaction, and Muslims have been living in India for, so long, okay, without problems. Especially if you look into some states such as Tamil Nadu or even Kerala, okay. So, I think with the growth of Islamic, what we call Islamic revivalism, or scholars have called Islamic revivalism, I think this is one gem, okay, in the Islamic tradition which a lot of Muslims have lost. Okay, and unfortunately, I don't want to be that critical of Salafism per se, but you know, if you read into the literature, there is this sort of dichotomy, okay, between Salafis versus Sufis. But if you go along, say, with the Aman message, okay, then whether you are Sufi or whether you are Salafi, if you remain loyal to the essence of Islam, there shouldn't be any problem. Okay, but when you go to the extreme, okay, whatever line of thought say that one may be embracing or adhering to, then will get into problems. Okay, so I've also been very critical of Salafi jihadism, not Salafism per se, but Salafi jihadism, the jihadist version of Salafism, and I would not discount, okay, the fact or the claim that perhaps there are also some Sufis which in history have been extreme. Okay, and I think it's very important that Muslims, you follow the Wasati line, Islam being the moderate path, okay, as spelled out or as declared by Rasulullah SAW in various hadiths. So I think this message on Sufism, or the essence of Sufism, is very important, because later we'll see how this development does not necessarily mean that if one wants to become Sufi, then one necessarily has to become a member of a particular tariqah. Okay, for instance, this is a part of the new understanding that we have of Sufism. So a bit of background, especially for those of you who might be rather unfamiliar, with Southeast Asia. When it's mentioned, Islam in Southeast Asia is mentioned, you have this center-periphery relationship in the Muslim world. Basically the center of the core countries are those in the Middle East who speak Arabic as their lingua franca, as their main written and conversational language. And then you have the periphery. Turkey is somewhat in the middle, being in the Middle East, but it has Turkish as its main language. But Southeast Asian countries are clearly in the periphery, clearly in the periphery. And being in the periphery, Far East.
If we can continue, it's not working.
Oh, okay. Being in the Far East, sometimes it is regarded as the latest addition in the global, in the ranks of the Ummah, ranks of the Ummah. And because of this, there is the impression of Islam in Southeast Asia being marginalized. Even from a point of view of Muslim studies all over the world. So you see institutions in Asia or even in Malaysia, for instance, we study about the Middle East, and a lot of our students come to the Middle East to study religion. Whether in Azhar, or now in Jordan, it's very popular among Malaysians, Morocco, especially for Diniah studies, for Islamic studies. Sometimes they go for their first degree and second degree and then go to Europe or to the West to further their degrees at the PhD level. But Middle East has always been popular, but we do not see a reciprocal treatment of Asia from our Middle Eastern brethren. And sorry to say, and this is, sorry if there are any Arabs or Middle Easterners, this is not meant as a demonization of a particular race or ethnic group. But the fact of the matter is that if you go to universities in the Middle East, hardly any of them have some sort of Asian studies. Despite the fact that a lot of Asian immigrants, especially among the workers, have been flooding into the Middle East on economic grounds and so on. So those from the periphery somewhat have felt left out, despite the fact that actually the Muslims in Southeast Asia, you call them Malay Muslims or Malay-speaking Muslims, they constitute I don't know whether it's the majority or a large part of the Ummah. If you go to Indonesia, for instance, it's about more than 80% Muslim. Well, yes, we have layers of opinions on whether they might not be practicing totally practicing Muslims, or it might be syncretic. And the word which Orientalists use to depict Islam in the periphery is syncretic. That means an Islam which is mixed between the faith and the local culture. And there is always this debate on how far local culture can be absorbed into Islamic practices. And then you have the extremes, of course. Those so-called Salafis who basically reject any cultural accretions which have taken place in Muslim societies. So we have this debate. So for those students, for those of you who are interested in this debate, you can go on reading. There are lots of literature on this. So when I say Islam in Southeast Asia, the orthodox bit, it basically builds itself epistemologically on three branches of knowledge, which is I've outlined here, is Tawhid, Fiqh, and Tasawwuf. So Tasawwuf is what we understand by Sufism. And how did the scholars, ulama, conceptualize this from the scripture? There is a very relevant hadith of the angel Gabriel, who met with the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and stood, sat face to face, and there was a dialogue between the Prophet and the angel Gabriel, and where the angel Gabriel asked the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, what is Islam, what is Iman, and what is Ihsan. You go to Matan Arba'in, the first 40 hadiths of An-Nawawi is there. I think it's the very first hadith. So you look into how epistemologically this system of Islam being basically the Sharia, and that later developed into several schools of thought, which we know by the name of fiqh schools, whether it's Shafi'i, Hanafi, Hanbali, Maliki. They are not only four. There was more mujtahids. There were about 11 or 12 people like Sufyan al-Thawri, al-Awza'i. These people did not follow any of the four madhabs. They had their own independent madhabs. But then the scholars came to a consensus that you have to follow these four. This is Orthodox Sunnism, what I'm trying to explain here. You have to follow the four, because these are the four schools of thought which left publications. That's why for scholars it's very important to leave publications behind. That's our legacy. You have the kitab. You have the books of fiqh to refer to. But there were not only four schools of jurisprudence. You have the Tawhid, or Unitarian theology, and the two most important schools of thought in Orthodox Sunni thought is the Ash'arite and the Maturidite. Most of the Shafi'is, say in Malaysia, for instance, or in Egypt, theologically they follow the Ash'arite school, and most of the Hanafis, they follow the Maturidite school. There's slight difference, but these are basically, when you see Orthodox Sunnism, and of course later there comes a Salafi challenge and so on, with different understandings of Tawhid systematized by scholars such as Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Qayyim. That's another matter. But basically what we understand by Orthodox Sunnism, and which later developed in the Malay world, is this. And then you have Tasawwuf. The most important scholar, as far as the understanding and practice of spirituality in the Malay world is concerned, is Al-Ghazali, who is Persian by ethnicity. Because he systematized a system of thought which married Sharia and Tasawwuf. Before that, basically before him, there was this clash between the aesthetic or drunken Sufis, with the sober, with the sober Sufis. So you read back into history, there were cases where Sufis were killed by the Caliph and so on, because there were utterances which were against the Sharia. Look into history. These are the days before Al-Ghazali. Okay, and Al-Ghazali's thought was systematized in the Malay world and imported into the Malay world through the synthesizing books of several scholars, among them Abdul Samad Al-Falmani, very important scholar, okay, who wrote Hidayatul Salikin. These are some of the main books. Okay, and later you can Google, okay, just by listening to me, you can Google some of these books or sources, how important are them. So Al-Ghazali basically popularized sober Sufism. So if you look into Sufism in the Malay world, you don't have that type of, say, extreme sort of Sufi dancing, and so it's very foreign. Okay, as in contrast with some areas in the Middle East, which I visited, which I've even visited to some hadrats, or the Sufi congregations in Egypt and so on. You have the dancing, or the movement, the physical movements of which, okay, to a Malay Muslim, that would be considered extreme. So we have this problem lately, okay, when because of the improvement in communications, in technology, okay, and so on, where foreign Sufis, okay, have been very important, okay, lately to Malaysia. Okay, but some of the practices, okay, they bring to the East are not in line with the culture back home. But I'll go to that later. Okay, so then you look at it historically. Okay, you look at it historically. Many scholars have written of the historic links between Islam in Southeast Asia, in the Malay world, with Sufism. Several articles written by a scholar from Australian National University, Anthony Jones, okay, for instance. Although he changed his opinions, okay, in 30 or 40 years of writing on the history of Islam, okay, but basically he still attributed a very strong role, okay, to Sufism in the dissemination of Islam in the Malay world. So Sufis, okay, basically brought the banner of Islam, and a lot of them, there were several waves, but one of the major waves came after the defeat of the Abbasids in Mongol, by the Mongols. That was in 1258 AD. So there was then a movement, okay, and a lot of these were also brought by the descendants of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, those known as the Sharifs or the Sayyids. Okay, and a lot of them are in the Malay world, okay, especially in Indonesia, okay, in several places, and there are books written on this. One scholar, Sumi Mandal, wrote about becoming Arab, about how the life of the Sayyids under Dutch colonialism in Indonesia back in the 19th century. So there are a lot of sources, okay, which you can refer to. And another reason was that the persecution of the Ahlul Bayt, because of political, okay, convulsions that happened in the Middle East. Okay, so a lot of the Sayyids, they migrated purposefully. So you see a lot of linkages in terms of the lineage of some of the sultanates in the Malay world with the family of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. Okay, one well-known fact is the Sultan of Brunei, for instance. Okay, we know, in spite of a lot of stories about how un-Islamic, how very rich they were, but in terms of descent, okay, or familial lineage, okay, they actually trace their ancestry to these Sayyids or these Sharifs who actually came from the Middle East and established sultanates in the Malay world. So Islam in Southeast Asia then was systematized, okay, based on certain understandings. And I quote here from one of our major scholars in the Muslim world, Professor Osman Bakar, a very respected colleague of mine as well. Okay, that it developed around a common theology, a common law, Shafi'i school, a common political order, the Malay sultanates. Okay, and then we have the historic linkages between the ulama, okay, and the sultanates, okay, and common lingua franca. Okay, of course, originally, Islam came in Arabic, but then to make it accessible to the local Malay Muslims, a lot of books, okay, were later written, okay, in the Malay language. Okay. In fact, the first scholar who wrote a tafsir, an exegesis of the Quran in the Malay language was Abdul Singkil, okay, of Aceh. Okay, this was in the 17th century. Okay, so some of these trends later, of course, developed, okay, and after this era of pre-colonial dissemination, okay, of Islam, okay, at the hands of the Sufis and the ulama, and a lot of the ulama, a lot of the so-called students or Indonesians, you call them santris, okay, they emerge as ulama by extended period of study in the Middle East. Something like 20 years, they go to the Middle East, they come back, and become respected scholars. And this was the trend. And this, the main hub of this, the hub or the focus, or the destination, the preferred destination for the Malay Muslims were always the Haramain. And this went on until the Saud occupation in the 1930s. Then there was a shift, okay, from the Haramain to Egypt, especially to Universiti Al-Azhar, okay, in Cairo. But then I outlined here several trends, okay, and challenges to the orthodox development, okay, that I was explaining just now. There is the political challenge, okay, especially with the marginalization of Islam in the nation states. Of course, nation states, Indonesia got the independence in 1945, Malaya in 1957, they became Malaysia. Okay. But there was always this debate of how you would incorporate Islam into governance. Okay, so there was this demand for Jakarta Charter in Indonesia, for instance, for Sharia to be incorporated, okay, into the legal system of Indonesia, but then it was rejected. Okay, and basically the ulama or the Muslim scholars compromised a lot, okay, because they wanted support for independence. Not only independence was fought not only by the Islamists or the Muslim activists, okay, but also by nationalists, by secular nationalists, okay, by people of many orientations. Okay, and I think if you look at the contemporary history of Turkey, also we have this example. Okay, it's very difficult. Okay, when we have compromises to impose a certain line of thought. Okay, and this happened also in Malaya. Okay, especially when the society in Malaya was very brutal. Okay, even from the beginning of independence, we had something like 50% Muslims. Now it's been, it has increased, of course. But at the beginning, okay, it was very fragile. So there was a lot of compromise, and Islam was made as the religion of the federation. And there's always this debate of what that means. whether Islam is official or non-official, what does that entail, okay, in terms of policy making. Okay, and then we had these challenges, okay, from several trends. The Salafiyah trend in 1930s, which basically gave rise in Indonesia to the Muhammadiyah movement, and in Malaysia to the Young Faction movement, okay, kaum muda movement. Okay, and these were basically movements that were inspired by the Afghani Muhammad Abduh and Rashid Ridha tradition, the Al-Manar tradition, okay, in the Middle East. Okay, and there were several figures that you can identify with them in the Malay world. Okay, and then in the okay, now then there's another very important trend, okay, which I've also written about. What time are you giving me?
Actually, as fast as we can.
Right. Okay.
Now to leave some room for the questions.
Okay, right.
We won't have time. If we can wrap up fast, it's going to be good.
These are just some explanations. Later there will be pictures. So
no,
pictures will be fast.
It's very useful. That's right. And it's very useful. But you know, keeping in mind the time and questions and answers,
Okay.
It may be hectic for you as well.
Okay, and the final trend, which I outline here, or I list here, is the Salafi Wahhabi trend, okay, which must be different from the first Salafi trend. And this is basically Saudi Arabia influence, okay, especially from the ulama who have been trained in Saudi Arabian institutions, but not just Saudi Arabian institutions, but some core scholars, okay, who have been who defends who subscribes to this tradition. A lot of them, okay, I won't say all, but a lot of them are Saudi linked. Okay, that's why the term Wahhabi, okay, is used there. It's not meant as a vilification, okay, but it's to identify it with the system of thought popularized by Sheikh Muhammad Abdul Hamid, okay, from Najdi. So you have this mixture, and I like this picture because it's a mixture of the ulama in the Malay world. Some are modern, some are traditionalists with different types of clothing. Okay, a bit Western, some very traditional. Okay, but they can get together in gatherings and so on. And this was a bit the pre-Salafi era. Okay, even when we had the kaum muda, the young faction versus kaum tua rift, so-called rift, okay, it wasn't as rigid as what we have been having with the latest Salafi tradition from the 1980s onwards. Okay, because that raised issues of takfirism, of the excommunication of fellow Muslims and so on. Okay, and these are, I think, some of the developments which you can refer later, of course. So, what are the challenges that have confronted Sufism? And my reference will be mainly to Malaysia and Indonesia, okay, because of the limitations in terms of time and space of writing when I was writing the chapter. Okay, this basically refers to developments in Malaysia and Indonesia. It doesn't touch on those in, say, Vietnam or other countries of Southeast Asia, or even southern Thailand, which is still in Southeast Asia. So we look into what I say is the organizational challenge, or the challenge of the logic of the nation state, okay, where tariqas have to be registered, because you can't have nation states can't afford to have a sort of fifth column operating, because tariqas, they're very fluid. You don't actually have to register when you take a particular bay'ah, you're part of a member, but the nation state is very sensitive of its challenges to its power. Okay, those students of political science here will understand. Okay, so in order to legitimize the tariqas, they are registered as organizations. Okay, and we have this organization of the respectable Sufi orders, for instance, the ATM in Indonesia, especially to differentiate between orthodox and non-orthodox tariqas. And some tariqas are even fake tariqas, okay, with fake sheikhs and so on, okay, who go on and tell very strange things about Islam, probably based on non-authentic sources, which has actually laid a lot of Sufi groups vulnerable to allegations of heresy. Okay, this has happened, I believe, not just in Malaysia, but a lot of nation states as well. And in Malaysia, the development was very late. In 2015, there was this Pertubuhan Tarikat Muktabar Malaysia. And then we have other developments, and I think a very important group is Darul Arqam, which was founded in 1968 by a scholar, Syari Muhammad, and then developed into Rufaka, into Global Ikhwan. You can Google all these things, and I've written on this. And my PhD was on this group specifically, through an ethnographic approach. And later you could understand why, what are the links, for instance, between some of the Sufi groups with some of the restaurant chains, even here in Istanbul, like Brother Ahsan will realize now. Okay, and I for many groups or personalities which I've researched on, I prefer or try not to sever links with them, because after you research on them, your links are there and you maintain them forever. Especially if they are, our own Muslim brothers, of course. And I say this with conscience because a lot of Western professors and so on, they come and research societies in the Orient, with the Orientalist tradition, and they get their professorships, they get their deanships, and so on. But the societies they study in, they leave it just like that. So that's why you see that I have many links. Whether in government, whether among NGOs, whether in Sufi groups, and even among some extremists. And I'm also involved in the radicalization program of extremists in Malaysia. So these are several Sufi groups which became modern groups, but they still have Sufism as part of their program, but it's not systematized as a tariqah as such. And this I mentioned here is Sufism without tariqah. This is sort of a trend. Especially when the word tariqah has been laid vulnerable because of a lot of fake sheikhs. Sorry to say. And another problematic area for some Sufis is the relationship cultivated between some sheikhs with some politicians. And some of these politicians don't have a good reputation Islamically. It's a problem. It's a problem. So when the Sufi group, so how is your political orientation? Whether you want to oppose the government or you want to be friendly with the government, even if though the government is less than Islamic. I won't say un-Islamic. There are Islamic programs, but less than Islamic. It's a mixture between modernity, and Islam. So Sufi groups, the sheikhs, have to make a decision. How do you engage with them? Because this is the state. They have the power. Okay, and I mean, there are cases in Indonesia where some Habibs, for instance, I mentioned here Kuitang, which is an area of the Ba'alwi Tariqah. Okay, and those here who are familiar with the literature on Sufism, you know Habib Umar, for instance, of Tarim, okay, Hadramaut, in Yemen. Okay, so some of these past Sufi groups affiliated with the Ba'alwi Tariqah in Indonesia, okay, they are very close with some of the Golkar politicians. And these politicians, they have been repressive on, well, other groups. So all this is very controversial. And then you have this Sufism without Tariqah orientation operated by some figures which I've mentioned here. Okay, you have the Habib Munzir, for instance, who has passed away. Majlis Rasulullah is a function, graced by the spirit of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. These are all, for Salafis, all of these conceptions are very controversial, Okay, and then we have these great salawat functions, Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad, meeting to concerts and so on. Okay, and another group, Global Ikhwan, is so well known for its concerts, restaurant chains, and so on. Okay, I don't know if we have time later, can look at the YouTube here. So this is Sufism operating in a modern fashion. Okay, not the traditional fashion that we understand of them engaging just in hadra, or in zikr. That is still on, but a lot of blending of Sufi culture with modernity in terms of organization, in terms of business links, and in terms of cultural practices, and so on. And there is this large question of Sufism being an antidote to extremism. Of course, we have been having these problems, especially with the rise of groups like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and so on, especially since 9/11, in the USA. But I think it's very important, at this juncture for Sufis, to remember and to be disciplined, so as not to be enticed, by the challenges presented by the nation state. Because there's always this danger, that when you cave in to the desires of the state, a lot of things are compromised. So Sufi groups, they are not uniform in their response. So this is also Sufi, this is also Sufi, this is, a bit pro-government, this anti-government. You have this. Same is the case with the Salafis actually. Their response is not uniform. And there are differences of opinions between the leading Salafi sheikhs themselves. You have these similar, problem or development in Sufism as well, with examples. But I won't go into specific examples due to consideration of time. But there is also this revival of Turath studies, the heritage studies. And some of this newfound vigor, has been initiated, or say raised, by the oncoming of newfound technology, where you can actually even take a bay'ah just through the computer. Not just among the extremists, even among Sufis, because you get a lot of modern technology, developing. You can communicate across borders, unlike in the old days. So a lot of Malaysians, themselves, and a lot of nations themselves, they can enjoy talks, seminars, sheikhs, okay, or Sufis from the Middle East. And of course, among the popular ones in Malaysia, for instance, is the Turkish Cypriot famous Sheikh Nazim al-Qubrusi. Qubrusi means from Cyprus. Okay, and another very important Sheikh, I think, is Sheikh Abdullah al-Harari, whom, for those of you who've done your reading, you know, this Ahbash movement in Lebanon based. But yeah, many people will say that Ahbash is a bit extreme because it has a takfiri orientation against the Salafi Wahhabis. Okay, but I won't go specifically to that. You can do your own reading. Okay, and some of these different layers of opinion. Okay, so I mean the Ahbash, for instance, disavows Sheikh Nazim. So, okay, and this development in Malaysia continues and continues. Okay, so we had a fatwa committee in Malaysia, National Fatwa Committee, pronouncing the Naqshbandiyah Aliyah brought by Sheikh Nazim as deviant in 2000. 22 years later, just earlier this year, that was reversed. Depends on who are the members, who are the part of the Fatwa Committee. So once it was pronounced deviant, then it became, once it was haram, then became halal, then okay, it depends on who are the members of the Fatwa committee. This is the very latest development. And because this Naqshbandiyah Aliyah is actually subscribed to by a lot of influential elites in Malaysia. Okay, even the royal family of Perak, for instance. Okay, they are known adherents to this particular tariqah. Okay, so these are mostly pictures. Okay, of some sources which I would recommend: contemporary developments in Indonesian Islam. And Martin van Brunissen is a very well-known scholar. He came to Penang in 2000, about 3 years ago, and contacted me, and let's have some chat. So I went to visit him at this hotel, bringing my postgraduate student, Dr. Chihamdan. He was still a PhD student at this time. This was in Penang. I'm staying in Penang. Okay, Universiti Sains Malaysia, my university is in Penang, not in Kuala Lumpur. So if you look into, I think one of the top contemporary orientalists, but he's retired now from Utrecht University. And a lot of Indonesian scholars, for instance, Nur Haidi Hassan, okay, you know, they were students of Pak Martin. Okay, he's a Dutch scholar, okay, and very well versed and speaks in Asia as well. I think he would be very important to Turkey because he's an authority on Indonesia and Kurdish nationalism. Right, I think he would be very important, especially for those students who studies Kurdish history, okay, or Kurdish nationalism. Some of the problems of extremism or terrorism we have in Indonesia, some of the support given in some of the books written by extremists, okay, in Indonesia, and to solve them or to rehabilitate them, the government purposely uses some scholars who are affiliated with Sufi thought, okay, or Sufi culture. This is an open support, okay, to ISIS or to takfiri narratives, okay, that we have among these so-called extremists, okay. And then some report in Asian newspaper. In Asia, they're also very wary of radicalization, of extremism, and we will know from those of you who have done your reading that the Nahdlatul Ulama, which is a very traditionalist-oriented organization, it proposes or puts forward a conception known as Islam Nusantara Islam, okay, rather than Middle Eastern Islam. Okay, as I was saying at the beginning, how there is this center, core periphery or center periphery division. okay, in the Muslim world. Okay, and there's a quote on the right from Almarhum Sheikh Yusuf Qaradawi, just deceased. Okay, of course, although Sheikh Qaradawi himself has been accused of, having indulging, okay, in some extremist thought. You will see some of these controversies, okay, if we've done our reading, of course. Okay, although a lot of his writings, especially from the earlier part before the Syrian war, they've been very moderate, okay, very wasati. Okay, these are some talks, by the security. Okay, some posters of talks given by security officers on the Salafi Jihadi or Takfiris. Given by security officers, okay, in Malaysia. I know both of them, by person, and the one on the left is my former student, okay, at undergraduate level. The one on the right is very well known, Ayub Khan, okay, as the head of the E8, which is the anti-terrorism unit, but now he's been promoted, okay, to become the head of the narcotics division in the Royal Malaysian Police Force. And I think he's been one of the major voices speaking out against this Takfiri or ISIS related or Al-Qaeda related terrorism, okay, especially among Muslim extremists. Okay, and how some Indonesian scholars also have been helping out in Malaysia, and this is a very important, I think, Nahdlatul Ulama scholar, Idrus Ramli, okay, who comes frequently to Malaysia and delivers talk on Orthodox Judaism, okay, or Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, okay, or as the acronym goes in Malaysia, Aswaja. Okay, so you have this Salafi versus Aswaja clash, okay, developing, especially in social media, okay, in Malaysia, and two other very important, I think, scholars, Hidayat Nur Muhammad and Ustadz Samad, okay, both of whose talks and speeches are popular, especially, okay, among Malaysians. Pro-Sufi, but this is what I was speaking just now, how you harmonize your discourse, okay, with the logic of the nation state, because okay, the spirit is very spiritual, okay, but it doesn't bring one to necessarily give bay'ah to a particular shaykh, as we have in traditional Sufism, okay, but I mean a lot of the narrative, okay, brought by them is also very anti-extremist. So the government gives a bit of leeway, okay, for them to propagate their thoughts. Some of the books written, okay, for instance, okay, especially against extremist thought, okay, and this is by some of the Indonesian Aswaja preachers in Malaysia, and this is more to do with my own specialty, okay, or expertise, and these are some of the suggestions that actually we've made through many seminars, working papers, okay, to the government and so on, to ways to actually combat, okay, this problem of extremism affecting Malay Muslim youth, okay, back in Malaysia. And of course, although the numbers are not large when compared with perhaps European youths, okay, who are in the Middle East fighting for ISIS, okay, and so on. But still, for Malay Muslims, it was a shock. Okay, in 2014, beginning from 2014, for instance, to discover, okay, that there are Malay Muslims who have become suicide bombers. But this is very alien to, to the culture. To the culture, it was a shock to the nation. Okay, and to many Malay Muslims that we've reached an extent where you could actually kill other fellow Muslims, okay, because as a result of having imbibed the Takfiri doctrine. Okay, in fact, there were reports also that when the Taliban, okay, first took over power back in August 2021, okay, there were 2 Malaysians arrested by the Taliban new government for fighting on behalf of ISK, which is the Islamic State Khorasan. Now, these are 2 extremist groups who are at loggerheads with each other. So even the ISK, they actually bombed. I think there were several bombings which were done by the ISK. But it was later found, and this I discovered from my interviews, okay, with the security officers, that the 2 were not in fact Malaysians, but they were Indonesians. But still, they were Southeast Asians. Okay, and if you look into the some latest developments, okay, for instance, you can look to reports, okay, of some ISIS fighters being used by NATO now, okay, to fight for Ukraine against Russia. Some of these Muslim fighters were actually nabbed or caught and interviewed. You can watch it online. These are some actually very interesting developments, okay, which might not be directly related to Islam in South Asia, okay, but I think when we speak about ghulu or extremism, okay, in general, okay, especially for scholars or students who are engaged, okay, with this topic, okay, I think it's very important to keep abreast with developments going on globally. And of course, the third point I mentioned, which I think is very important, is to emphasize the teaching of tasawwuf. Okay, and I think, as I said at the beginning, it's a lost gem in Muslim tradition, okay, especially since the rise of Salafi thought and Salafi culture, that there is this kind of vilification, okay, of tasawwuf or Sufism as having entangled Muslims, having entangled Muslims with shirk or with practices, okay, which are against Islamic norms. And there are a lot of allegations on very crucial or very critical practices. Okay, if you look into the literature and see the differences of opinions among Sufis and Salafi scholars on questions like tawassul, prayer by intercession, is it allowable, permissible or not? Okay, the debate is so huge. The debate is very big. I won't go into the details here. There's this debate about tabarruk, taking barakah, okay, perhaps through certain artifacts. We have the holy relics in the Topkapi mosque, in the Topkapi palace, okay, for instance. Okay, so whether it's permissible or not, okay, to take barakah from the relics, okay, left by the companions or left by the Holy Prophet or the Prophet's family and so on. These are very big issues, okay, dividing the ummah, I would say. Okay, so I would end there, I think. Do you think we have time to see it? It's about only a 3-minute video just now. If
will not be able to have questions today, but because this professor is here, and I'm thinking, because you know it was very intriguing lecture, so there must be a lot of questions in your minds. I mean, I'm one of them, you know, I had a lot of questions, and I really want to ask them. So probably we can plan. I mean, there's a list outside. If your name is not there, you can drop in your name and your email address, your contact information there. We'll probably organize once Prof is back, or if he's not back, we can also organize an online lecture with him, where we ask him questions based on today's lectures. I really apologize for cutting it short, but probably, you know, it's late for everybody. So please do accept my sincere apologies. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.